All right. Welcome, guys. My name is Valentina Alaria. I'm one of the product managers on the VKE service. And I'm joined today by Sean Odell. He's a cloud architect working with a lot of the users that we onboard into our services. So both Sean and I, as I said, sort of spend a lot of time with our user community and with developers particularly. I know we're dressed up nicely today, but we usually are a little more casual. And we both love to talk with our hands. So you'll see us doing a lot of that. Back to the serious topic. So we spend a lot of time with developers. And so some of the things that we're doing is looking at what are some of the key components of developer toolchain that we want to bring into the VKE service. So today, beside the disclaimer, we're going to tell you a lot of secrets. We're going to spend a little time just getting you an idea of what the VMware Kubernetes Engine is, if you haven't been in any of the other sessions or labs in which we have used it. But then we're going to spend most of the session just sort of showing you how we have integrated with our friends at CloudBees here, as well as one of our internal VMware service, which is bringing sort of CI/CD solutions. All right, so first and foremost, what is VMware Kubernetes Engine? If you're not familiar with VKE yet, VKE is one of the newest services in the VMware Cloud Service portfolio. And we built it because we have been talking with users, and we keep hearing that, hey, offering Kubernetes my developers is actually pretty hard. And so can VMware help me with that? And so we built something that makes offering clusters to developers extremely simple and easy. So it's a fully managed service. We built it natively on AWS. This comes out of a team that it's up in Seattle, strong cloud DNA. So we sort of built it on top of a cloud-native stack. So we don't leverage vSphere or ESX or VMC, just sort of built natively on EC2 instances, EBS volumes, ELB load balancers, and so on and so forth. And the whole promise of VKE is that it's really darn simple to build a cluster. We're not going to spend time on that aspect in this session because really it's more about the CI/CD integration bits, but if you get on the service yourself, and I can give you a little card on how to get on the service at the end of the session, you'll see that it really takes just a couple of minutes to build a cluster and you're up and running. One of the other things that it's pretty interesting about VKE is that it makes it pretty easy to sort of configure what type of access policies you want for those clusters. And so that becomes pretty relevant for sort of the developer counterpart in the enterprise, which wants to offer a very large number of clusters, but wants to make sure that they actually control who gets to deploy stuff on the cluster itself. One thing that it's relevant from a developer perspective is that VKE is fully Kubernetes conformant. So the CNCF has this certification process through which Kubernetes product or services can go through. And what that does for you is that it makes sure that we guarantee developers to have a very upstream Kubernetes experience. So again, this sort of translates into being able to just grab a Helm chart or a deployment YAML and drop it on top of VKE, and the experience would be it just works. The last thing maybe that it's relevant for this audience is that today this runs on top of AWS, and what it means is that you can get native AWS services as part of your application construct. So you can, if you want to leverage things like RDS or other AWS services, you'll be able to do that seamlessly as part of a VKE cluster. And today it runs, as I said, on AWS, and we're going to roll out Azure in the near future, in the next few months. So before we go into the CI/CD integration, there's one aspect of VKE that it's very unique, and it becomes relevant when you're doing things dynamically on top of a cluster, on top of a Kubernetes infrastructure. So VKE has this unique construct of a smart cluster. And the whole idea behind it is that when you bring up a cluster, very often there is a gap of time between the time it's brought up and the time an application is actually running on the cluster itself. And there's also workloads, and pipelines are a great example where there's like seasonality or elasticity of the type of load that runs on the cluster itself. So what the smart cluster does is that it's going to create an empty cluster for you at the beginning. It's just going to have sort of the brain of the cluster, the master nodes. But then everything that it's worker related is not going to get provisioned until the application is actually deployed on the cluster itself. So this translates into obviously some cost savings from an enterprise perspective, because you're not burning AWS resources if you're not actually in need of these resources. And the cluster will keep growing and shrinking as it's needed. So you're sort of going to be always at the optimal sizing point for the cluster. We'll see how that sort of fits into, as I said, the CI/CD story in a second. The other thing that it's unique about the smart cluster is that you have sort of built-in high availability constructs. So there's no need for developers to worry about, OK, I got to understand how Kubernetes works and how it works in conjunction with AWS best practice. And when I create a cluster, I have to spread my master nodes across AZs and my worker nodes across AZs. And what if something fails? Kubernetes takes care of VKE takes care of all of this for you. So when you select what we call a production cluster, we will automatically spread the master nodes and the worker nodes across AZs. And we're also constantly monitoring the health of all the components of the cluster. And we'll be repairing things dynamically under the covers for you. I was doing sort of like a demo. I was just running something on the service yesterday. I was with a bunch of people in a session, and we were deploying an application. And then I went and I showed them the composition of the cluster. And I've been using this cluster for a few days, constantly for demos. And I realized that 2 of my master nodes were 6 days old, which is when I first created the cluster. But one of my master nodes was like 30 minutes old. So while I was actually doing the demo, the health monitoring of the VKE system realized that a node was in a bad place, build up a new one, kill the old one, and as I was live deploying applications on the service and on the cluster. So all of that is just sort of happening magically under the covers. So now you got a cluster or many clusters. What can you do with the cluster? So clearly, as I said, Sean and I, our focus is really to spend time with developers. And what we hear all the time is that we have to concentrate our integration efforts along this axis of these 4 steps of the developer life cycle, right? So looking at everything that will help them from the source, build and test, image storage, all the way to the critical step of actually deploying something in your production environment. And we internally to VKE, we are a very agile service. We push to prod at least once a day, if not more. So we understand that that's the need of all the users that we work with. And so we're doing a whole bunch of different things here, from what we call just sort of like lightweight validated solutions, where we make sure that we can work together, to a lot of things that we're sort of envisioning for the future of just more of a like turnkey or battery included type of integration with different partners. So in the next part of the session, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our partners, and we're going to show you some of these things in action. So there's sort of like 2 things that we're going to show you today. And Sean is going to walk you through this, running things live on the service. So the first thing is that obviously when you integrate with a CI/CD solution, and that's what we're going to be, again, spending the time today on, there's 2 aspects of this integration. One is that you can run your pipelines on Kubernetes, right? So this is really like where are you running the pipeline intelligence itself, where you're building images, where you're running all these components. And one of the interesting things there is obviously that sort of ties back into the whole smart cluster, elastic cluster behavior. The other thing is, when you're deploying actually something into production or pre-prod or staging or whatever steps you have in your environment, that Kubernetes endpoint can be a VKE cluster that it's running on the service itself. And so we're going to sort of show you those 2 things. For the second one, it's more of just making sure that we have an upstream Kubernetes experience. There's nothing special really that we're doing there. But it's just one data point for you to see that, hey, these guys have thought through how to be a part of the community and make sure that the experience is very smooth there. In general, I think there's a big opportunity to simplify life for CI/CD solutions, and again, sort of like bring more value to the VKE solutions around service accounts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a concept that it's very relevant for any of those integration points, because service accounts are sort of like these long-lived API tokens that are used for external entities to interact with a Kubernetes cluster. And it's not necessarily the simplest thing to configure. And so I was sort of like browsing through a bunch of Helm charts and YAMLs a few days back, getting ready for another talk that I have, and I was just puzzled by seeing how many of those service accounts configurations are just like wide open cluster access. And that's clearly not best practice. So I sort of want to put a word of caution there. When you do enable a service account, make sure you do it properly, because service accounts give you superpowers into clusters. So make sure you do it properly. If you just need one namespace, do it just for the namespace. Don't do cluster-wide. And again, comes with superpowers. All right, so we're going to move into the demo. We're going to do 2 demos. We're going to first look at which one of the 2 first?
We're going to look at CodeStream first. So
right.
we'll do a little bit of a dance here. So I've got a bunch of more slides. No, I'm just kidding. We can go there if we want to. No, seriously, from our perspective, I think it's one of the, to set the stage from a VMware perspective, VMware Cloud Services, Kubernetes Engine, right? Our goal and objective is really to have choice and freedom. At the end of the day, we firmly believe you, the customer, our customers, partners, and so on, even developers within the same organization, they may want to use one CI/CD solution versus another. And so at the end of the day, you can tell here, I'm actually going to jump into 2 demonstrations. I'm going to use VMware CodeStream, which we announced yesterday as a part of the multi-cloud automation piece, an announcement that we made. And then what I'm actually going to do after that is I'm going to jump into another cluster, another pod that we have running. It's actually the full CloudBees Jenkins stack running on top of VMware Kubernetes Engine. And our partners and friends are up here at the front from CloudBees. So we'll have a little bit of fun with this today. And I'm not going to do any more slides except for the end. So with that in mind, we've got a few minutes here. So I'll actually take an opportunity to actually look at creation of a cluster. I could do this from a command line. I could also do it from API access. In this case, I'm in the Kubernetes engine. This is our Acme Fitness org. So if you've seen Dan, he did a couple of sessions on this as well, where we have our FitCycle app and a few others. So in this case, instead of actually hitting the deploy button, I'll just walk you through the steps. And we think this is extremely important. So if I need to just spin something up rather quickly, we have the developer opportunity. In this case, I can choose the Kubernetes version. In my case, I'm locked, right? And then I have the opportunity to choose a production cluster. And the key with the production cluster versus a developer cluster is obviously HA capabilities, everything that is associated with I'm just doing a quick test versus I really need to run a production application. And so in the case of VMware, we actually have production applications today running on VMware Kubernetes Engine. So it's extremely exciting for us where we've come from and obviously what we're delivering today. You do see some custom networking changes. And then as Valentina mentioned before, you get to pick the location of said smart cluster. So in this case, I can pick US East Virginia. I will call this out. We did introduce privilege mode, so the ability to basically root equivalent functionality within the pod, and this is definitely something we're extremely excited about.
And just to add, that's very relevant to
yes.
sort of a CI/CD conversation, because the way you build images today is you actually run you build it in a privileged pod. So that's pretty critical to support those type of use cases.
In the case with privilege mode, it is really at the creation time of the smart cluster, whether you would apply it or not. And then I can give it a cluster name. And we do have some advanced configurations. This is related to policy. So our team, we have a pretty, 5 or 6 of us that jump in. In one case, some of the team only have access to certain clusters because I'm a lot more dangerous than everybody else is, to be honest. And so you get into different scenarios. We allow you to apply policy from top down, give access to Bill and Dan, but not me, or Valentina. And I think Jeff has been crazy and given us from CloudBees access at some point in time as well. So let's jump in here a little bit. I think for that, let me show you a kind of a quick view. I've got a plethora of smart clusters in this particular instance. This is a demo cluster that we've created. You see here the allocated computing resources, both from a memory and CPU perspective, the additional namespaces or the namespaces that I have created, and then obviously the networks. I do want to show you this real quick. I can jump into the Kubernetes UI, and I have access to the Kubernetes UI at that point in time. But I know we're in a code session, so we should probably get out of the UI for a minute. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to show you, in my case and in my scenario, I'm going to go ahead and authenticate. So rather than
maybe a little bigger.
Oh yeah, sorry. So rather than show you my auth token, because I really don't want to put that out on the internet, I've created a shell script to actually connect to my Kubernetes, to my VKE instance, and actually set a folder in this particular case for one of my smart clusters, and then I am authenticating to a particular cluster. So I'm going to laugh if demo gods are not with me. Okay, cool. So you can see rather quickly, I've logged in, I've authenticated, I've set my folder to VCS CTS, and then I've configured the authentication from the VKE CLI to the kubectl, and I've set my context to a particular cluster in this case. So as you can, so you'll see it. I can do a kubectl and get pods. So what am I looking at real quick? Obviously, I have my running pods within my smart cluster, and you say, where did this come from, right? With that in mind, I'm going to jump back and show you the UI from a code stream perspective. So this pipeline we built in a basic, pretty simple format. It's actually utilizing, if it's out on GitHub, if you want, one of my peers, he just created a quick repository for this. And I have the necessary pieces for our, what we call CS pipeline VKE. And we did take this right from the web. And we have it's a basic GitHub repository, pretty simple stuff. This application includes guestbook, WordPress, Cassandra. And from our perspective, what we're going to do when we get into CodeStream is we're actually going to utilize that GitHub repository to instantiate our application from within the pipeline. So this, obviously looking at CodeStream, I see here I'm going to deploy the Redis master. Notice that's step one. I look at my input pieces. Obviously, I'm calling GitHub in this particular use case. I have no outputs. I have no notifications. Well, we're doing some pretty simplified things for this example. And then, from then on, each of these Kubernetes components is going to be deployed based upon the GitHub repo. Now, I'm pretty sure, I think there's an authentication issue. I don't think we re-auth between VKE and CodeStream, so I'm not actually going to update the pipeline. But if you were to make a change to GitHub, obviously the code changes, and then we would redeploy accordingly. The other thing to note within CodeStream is obviously the existing executions. You can come in, you can see the historical ramifications of code changes within the environment, but it really is about just simplification from a CI/CD perspective. There's a lot more to it, but we won't go into that for today's demonstration. The next piece, I want to kind of shift a little bit. So I've given you the overarching view of seeing VMware Kubernetes Engine, obviously a CI/CD pipeline working, kind of in a base stage. But more importantly, I have a CloudBees Jenkins instance, which I'm sorry, I've got some broken pipelines in my particular example. Things don't always work as they should, right? Let me make sure I'm authenticated here. Okay, I'm in. In what we're looking to accomplish with this particular scenario, I'll just kind of highlight. In this case, our friends from CloudBees have actually deployed CloudBees Jenkins on top of VMware Kubernetes Engine. I have my, obviously in my case, I'm looking at this particular instance. And what we want to highlight with this is really the flexibility of Kubernetes. At the end of the day, you can take an application which the CloudBees team has already running on Amazon Web Services, on Azure, on Google, on premises. We now have the same capability. The simplification of Kubernetes is what I would refer to it as. That allows me to take the same code and instrument on multiple Kubernetes services, whether on-prem or in the cloud. And so this is just kind of a simple demonstration of what we've done there. The other thing to note, if I jump back into, and I'll go back to to CloudBees in just a second, is let me show you a little bit about what that environment looks like. So in this case, my two counterparts in crime have built this out, and there is an application from within Kubernetes or within VKE called Mobile Test. That's our Fit Cycle app. And then if I jump in here, and I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Wrong one. So, okay, it doesn't matter. Apparently, I don't have access. It's okay. So let's jump a little bit into from a CloudBees perspective. Really, what I wanted to highlight as we jump into this. Let me bail out just a second. These are really our activities. They're obviously broken in this case. I said it was an authentication issue, and each of these pipelines is really highlighting from a usability perspective. What are we authenticating to? In this case, it's CloudBees. It could be. That's why it's figured authentication was going to happen there. There we go. It really depends on how you want to consume and utilize. So in this case, I've got a single pipeline in my example for our team that is utilizing CloudBees running on VKE. And there is an application that has been provisioned on top of, and I think, let me set the stage here. CloudBees Jenkins is running on top of VMware Kubernetes Engine, and then it is provisioning an application from CloudBees Jenkins to VMware Kubernetes Engine. So yes, I did just say an extreme tongue twister. And really the goal here is to help you understand each of the phases, right? I've got a Maven install phase. If I look back historically, you can see all of the lovely code that's occurring. My Git functionality, my repositories, where I'm gathering this information, right? How I'm instrumenting this particular step of Maven. And then, it's clean. I like how you call it clean. And I have my, from there, I have my Docker build. So I don't know why I clicked that. It's going to go all the way down with it. Let me jump back up. There's my Docker build. So there is all of the instrumentation, all of the necessary details to help you see, yes, this was correct. Where did it break? It actually happened in a Docker push methodology because my auth is broken. But in what we're, really at the end of the day, VMware Kubernetes Engine allows for simplification. Really, Kubernetes allows for that. But I'll be honest with you, within 7 steps, you absolutely have the capability of creating a smart cluster. And if you have your YAMLs or your Helm charts, you have the ability to not only go from no cluster, but to a running application in really 7 commands. And it's pretty simple, maybe one less, maybe one more, depending on your scenario, or if you automate certain pieces. So, from there, in this case, we have a Docker push that's broken, right? And this is just the complete log of what we've deployed. So with that in mind, I could jump into the CLI and we could look at different Kubernetes pieces, but what I really wanted to do today is just highlight the CI/CD process and utilizing our partners, obviously VMware Technologies, repositories, and so on to help you provision an application really from nothing to something. And so I'll pause for just a second and see if there's any questions from the folks in the audience. Yes, sir. Okay. Let me repeat the question. The question was the code stream application, or I'll just jump to it for the sake of sanity. What version of CodeStream is this? This is actually the software as a service version of CodeStream. This was announced yesterday. It's a part of the multi-cloud automation stack that we announced yesterday. So this is actually a full SaaS service. It's not deployed on premises. And honestly, with everything I've deployed today, there's no vSphere behind it at any point in time. So there you go. Yes, sir. There was one more question in the back. So the question was, and I'm not going to answer this because I don't really know if I fully understand the answer, or if I know the answer completely. The question was, can I set declarative variables, if you want to call it that, in the YAML with CodeStream? I don't know, Bill or Dan, do you guys know that? I don't know that off the top of my hand. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know for sure. For CloudBees, can you do that today in CloudBees? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So I'm almost positive it's in CodeStream. I just haven't checked. I just did validate with Jeff from the CloudBees team that in CloudBees Jenkins you absolutely have the capability. So it really just comes down to your CI/CD solution. Yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Nothing. Kubernetes questions, VKE questions. Okay. Well then, with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back over to Valentina. I don't know if you have another slide if you want to.
Oh, and it was just the final slide.
Yeah. But actually, I'll show you this. I think it's important. If you have any interest in looking at VMware Kubernetes Engine, right, go to cloud.vmware.com. You can request access, and then we'll give you access, right, depending on certain category or criteria, et cetera.
Every night, pretty much.
Yeah, it's Valentina's job.
It's my personal pastime at night.
So if you want to get on the system, talk to Valentina. You know, she might take credit cards, checks, cash, whatever, chips. I don't know. And then Bill actually has cards before we leave. Another thing to look at, this is our CNA field guide. Definitely check out what we're doing here at VMworld. We've got a lot of sessions really across the Kubernetes space. We've got CloudBees has a session or two focused on CI/CD with CloudBees Jenkins. And really, you know, at the end of the day, we're just here to have a little bit of fun and talk about, you know, Kubernetes application deployment and really what our development counterparts are doing each and every day. So with that, I'm Sean O'Dell.
Thanks for joining us, and happy to chat more outside. Thank you.
Thank you.